Today we are counting down the top 10 most valuable key issues from Marvel Comics published during the year 1981. We're going to be looking at rarity, price, growth, and historical importance. Starting at number 10, Machine Man, number 19. He ranks as 10th of the year. Also on our chart, you will see it ranks 107th most valuable Marvel comic of the entire decade of the 1980s. You'll see it has a little bit of growth in the Overstreet price guide, currently guiding at $38 for a near mint 9.2 raw copy in the Overstreet price guide. And we're going to go look at close details on each of these books. So watch all of this. You will learn some interesting facts about each book, even if you think you know these books already. So first appearance of Jack-O-Lantern. He later becomes the second Hobgoblin. This is the last issue of this title. Cover art by Frank Miller, art by Steve Ditko. It's the 10th most valuable comic of the year. Print run is estimated at 125,000 copies. Being the last issue, print runs were likely shrinking at this time. Very few copies graded by CGC in total, only 169 copies, all grades, but there are 78 9.6s or better. Heritage has sold 55 copies in the last 2 decades, which is not a lot. There is a direct edition and a newsstand edition for all these comics released this year. The direct editions always have a picture of Spider-Man in the bottom left corner. At this time, the direct edition copies are much rarer than the newsstand editions, which were the majority of the market at this time. That would flip over the years. Looking at the Overstreet Annual Price Guide for all conditions, you can see that the book is pretty well stalled in all lower grades. A very affordable book, even in high grades raw. On the census, there are 27 9.8s, 51 9.6s. In 9th place for the year, we have Daredevil 175. And Daredevil is kind of the hot title of 1981, so Daredevil is going to show up a few times here. This issue, featuring a very cool cover, The End, Daredevil Elektra Fighting the Hand. There's a Kingpin cameo, Frank Miller and Klaus Janson cover and art. This book does have a 9.9 CGC copy. 9th biggest book of the year and 91st most valuable comic of the 1980s. 575 copies graded by CGC, 338 9.6s, so that's a lot more. Only 16 sold ever at Heritage. There's the direct edition and the newsstand edition. Again, an Overstreet price guide. All prices and all conditions have stalled in the last couple of years. There is a 9.9 graded and 159 9.8s. Number 8 on our list is also a Daredevil issue, 174, and this ranks as the 76th most valuable book of the decade. This book features the first appearance of the Hand, which is the ninja group that trained Elektra. And Elektra, Kingpin, and Gladiator appear in this issue. Frank Miller's story cover and art on this very cool cover. It's got 634 copies graded by CGC in total, and 369 9.6s or better. Heritage still not sold many of these. There's the 2 covers for American printings. Overstreet price, again, stalled in the last couple of years. There are 196 9.8s and 173 9.6s. Number 7 most valuable book of the year is Uncanny XMen 143. This is actually the second issue using this brand new title, and it is the last John Byrne issue. It ranks as 68th most valuable of the entire decade, and it is one of only 7 comics from this year that are worth $50 or more in near mint raw condition. So let's go learn a little bit more about this book. It's got the whole gang in this issue. It is a Christmas cover. You can see the Christmas tree hanging there. There are 3 copies graded 9.9 on the CGC census. Print run estimated at 259,000 copies for each of the X-Men issues printed during 1981. This book also features Rachel Ann Summers. On the census, you can see that X-Men is super hot right now. There are over 4,000 copies graded in total, with over 1,500 9.6s or better. Heritage has even sold over 200 copies. There's the 2 covers. Overstreet price guide, again, stalled. Quite affordable in all conditions, no movement. Check out eBay recently sold listings and also the GP analysis if you'd like to see how books are selling right on the spot and see how the slab CGC copies are selling, especially the 9.8s breaking records. On the census, we have 3 9.9s and 382 9.8s. The number 6 most valuable key book of the year is Daredevil 169. This is the second appearance ever of Elektra, and this issue also features Bullseye, Frank Miller's story cover and art. It's the second most valuable Daredevil issue of the 1980s. And 41st most valuable Marvel of the entire decade. CGC Census has jumped up to 462 copies overall, with 179.6 or better. But Heritage Auctions has sold very few copies of this in 20 years, not even one a year. On the Overstreet Price Guide Annual, you'll see that this book had jumped up to $75 in 2012, stalled, and then fell, and has not even made its comeback yet. So this book right now is sitting kind of cool for raw copies in the Overstreet Price Guide. On the census, there are 47 9.8s and 123 9.6s. Print run estimated at roughly 125,000 copies, which was fairly low end for Marvel at this time. Next on our list, this is one of the most unique ones on our chart. Number 5 of the year is Marvel Treasury Edition number 28. A few reasons why this one is unique on the list. It's a Treasury-sized comic book. It's also a tie-in with DC. It features Superman and Spider-Man in their second team-up. And this is also the last issue of the Marvel Treasury Edition. So print run may have been smaller, but then again, maybe not, because of the 2 major characters in this title. Hefty $2.50 cover price when the comics were only 50 cents. So that would be equivalent to now a book having about a $20 US cover price. It features the origin of Superman and Spider-Man, art by John Buscema, Joe Sinnott, and Terry Austin. It's the most valuable Superman-related comic of the 80s and the most valuable Treasury-sized comic of the 1980s. There are no copies on the CGC census because they do not grade Treasury-sized comics. And Heritage has only sold 4 copies ever in the last 20 years. Also features Dr. Doom on the cover. Overstreet Price Guide has been pretty holding for the last 15 years. Almost no movement in lower grades. Hasn't quite doubled in high grades yet. So that's a unique one. Displays are really cool if you want the 2 most iconic characters from the 2 biggest publishers joined together. The number 4 valuable comic of the year is Avengers Annual number 10. Annuals don't make these lists too often, but this is a major key book, ranking 4th of the year and even 24th most valuable Marvel comic of the entire decade. Why is it so valuable? Well, it's the first appearance of Rogue and Madeline Pryor. The X-Men, Spider-Woman, Carol Danvers, and the New Brotherhood of Evil Mutants all appear in this issue. It's got Michael Golden art. Print run estimated at around 200,000 copies. It's the most valuable Avengers-related comic of the 1980s as well. And the census has been skyrocketing. Over 5,300 copies graded in total, with over 2,000 over 9.6 or better. And Heritage has now sold over 100 copies. Being due to being an annual, it's thicker. It has a 75-cent cover price. And yes, there is a direct edition and newsstand edition of this annual. In the Overstreet Price Guide, very little movement in low grades. In the last 15 years, it's barely gone up at all. But high grades, it's almost doubled for raw copies. And on the census, there is 1 9.9 and 682 9.8. This would be a good one to definitely look up on the CGC census because this book is super high in demand all the time. And now we get up to the really big books of the year. Number 3 is Uncanny XMen 142. And this is, in a sense, a number 1 issue. The book had been called X-Men for the last 18 years, but with this issue, the title changes to Uncanny X-Men, but it keeps the same numbering. This book features Rachel's second appearance. Also, the Sentinels are in this issue, and it's the death of the alternate future Wolverine Storm and Colossus. Terry Austin cover, John Byrne art. Print run estimated at 259,000 copies. There is a 9.9 CGC copy. One of the most valuable X-Men comics of the 80s, and number 19 overall for the entire decade of the 80s. And again, the CGC census has gone crazy. Over 4,000 copies now graded, with almost 1,600 9.6s or better. Heritage has over 200 copies. Nice green background cover. Here's the direct edition. In the Overstreet price guides, again, low grade, not really any movement at all. And in high grade has almost doubled in the last 15 years, but that's still pretty slow for raw copies. On the census, 1 9.9 and 543 9.8s. In second place for the year, Uncanny X-Men number 41. This is a major book, and it is the final issue of X-Men. Now, it's John Byrne X-Men cover. This is a classic cover. There's many homage covers to this. And it's the Days of Future Past storyline. First appearance of Rachel Summers, Pyro, Destiny, and Avalanche. 259,000 print run. It's the number 2 comic of the year and number 9 of the entire decade. Again, the CGC census gone crazy for X-Men issues. 4,700 graded with almost 1,800 9.6s or better, and over 200 sold at Heritage in the last 20 years. Overstreet prices in the last 15 years has almost doubled, and it's tripled in high grades, but still generally moving fairly slow. So again, check out the GP analysis, see how those graded copies are selling. There's 1 9.9 and 676 9.8s. We also have a UK price variant out there. 29 copies have been graded, including 2 in 9.6. And this brings us to the number 1 most valuable and historically important comic from 1981, published by Marvel, and it is the classic Daredevil 168, the most important new character created this year. It's got the first appearance and origin of Elektra. And, of course, it comes from Frank Miller, starting a popular run. Print run estimated at 130,000 copies. It's the number 1 most valuable Marvel comic of 1981, but more importantly, the number 2 most valuable comic of the entire decade. The CGC census has gone crazy, over 4,500 copies, 827 9.6s or better, and Heritage has sold almost 200 in their auctions. In the Overstreet price guide, not too much movement in low grades again, but the book has shown some growth in higher grades in the last decade. And on the census, 204 9.8s and 623 9.6s. There's a UK price variant, 69 copies graded, the highest being a 9.6. Now, we're going to compare all these books on the CGC census just to see which ones seem to be rarer than others, which ones are harder to find in high grade, and which ones surprisingly are low on the CGC census. So starting at the high end, we've got Avengers Annual number 10 actually has the most copies graded of this entire top 10 list with over 5,000 copies. There is 1 9.9. Next on the list for the most copies, X-Men 141 with the first appearance of Rachel, 4,700 copies, also a 1 9.9. Looking at it from the other end, Machine Man 19 only has 169 copies graded in total. That's way lower than the rest, so much harder book to find. Comparing them on the high census, you can see that 5 of the 9 books on this list have a 9.9. Notice that the Marvel Treasury Edition 28 is not on this list because there are no copies graded at all due to its oversize. But if you look at 9.8s, what really stands out? Well, it would be, again, Avengers Annual 10 and X-Men 41. Those are the books that by far, this does not mean that these books are the rarest ones or the most common. It's just proving that these are truly the books that have way more demand So people are getting their copies graded either for their collections or for flipping because there's so much high demand for those books. Interestingly, Daredevil 168, the most valuable comic of the year, does not really have that many 9.8s on the census, only 204. So either people are not getting this book graded or it actually is rarer in top condition. And the Daredevil books, even though they dominated the list, are fairly low on the census overall. So does that mean they're overpriced overall in the annual price guide? Or is it that they increased so high up years ago that they've kind of stalled a bit? So you can kind of notice little trends going on with these kind of things. Overall, though, there's lots of copies of everything on here. Really, the only book that seems to be quite rare is The Machine Man 19. Again, just so few copies on the census. So there you go. The top 10 most valuable Marvel comics of 1981. Please subscribe to this channel. I post tons of videos like this, and we are learning the entire history of Marvel Comics week by week. Thanks for watching.